What's going on, everyone? Golden Ticket to History, and I'm here at the Volusia County Courthouse in DeLand, Florida. I'm here because I've been doing a lot of research into a topic that I've covered multiple times on the channel. If you've been on my channel for a while, you probably heard or seen the subject matter covered on this channel that I'm going to be talking about. However, no one has ever covered this specific location on their channel, on YouTube, ever. I'm here at the Volusia County Courthouse, and the significance of this courthouse is that it was supposedly the location where Aileen Wuornos' one and only murder trial took place. Even though she was charged with multiple murders, she only went to trial for one, and that was the murder of Richard Mallory, her very first victim. It is believed in many of the research, if you look it up, and many of the reports, they show this courthouse as being the courthouse where she faced her trial that ultimately led to her being sentenced to death. There's just only one problem. This courthouse did not open until December of 2001. She was already in prison for over a decade by this point in time, about 11 years or so. And this was actually about 10 months or so prior to her execution is when this courthouse opened. So I started digging deeper and deeper and deeper until I realized that this, in fact, was not the courthouse. But there is another courthouse a few blocks away, a Volusia County courthouse, that has been around for over 100 years. And that is the location of the infamous murder trial of Aileen Wuornos in relations to Richard Mallory. And I'm going to be taking you there very soon. As you can see right here is the plaque showing the dedication by the Volusia County Council, showing December of 2001 as being the erection date of this courthouse. I'm now standing outside of the original Volusia County Courthouse, where the trial actually took place. And it's right here. There it is in all its glory, believed to be one of the most aesthetically pleasing courthouses in the state of Florida, if not the country. And this is the courthouse where Aileen Wuornos' murder trial took place and ultimately led to her sentencing of death, becoming the American boogie woman, so to speak. I'm going to go a little bit in detail into the trial and all the elements that took place that ultimately led to her becoming one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. In Florida, a defendant convicted of murder can be punished by death if the murder is found to have been committed under certain circumstances listed in the Public Penal Code, such as the murder of a police officer or a firefighter, that the defendant murdered two or more victims, that the defendant committed a murder for hire, or that the murder was intentionally committed in the course of a kidnapping, burglary, robbery, aggravated rape, or other statutorily specific felony. The subclass of murders falling into these subcategories is called capital murder. Wuornos was charged with the first-degree murder of Richard Mallory, armed robbery with a firearm or deadly weapon, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Prosecutors argued Wuornos qualified for the death penalty based on the charge of murder committed in the course of a robbery. This was the only murder charge against Wuornos that went to trial. The other murder charges ended with guilty or no contest pleas that are discussed in the post-trial period that we're going to talk about very shortly. Capital trials are different in several ways from murder trials, in which the defendant is not eligible for the death penalty. First, jury selection in the capital cases requires that prospective jurors be death qualified, question about their ability to consider both aggravating and mitigating evidence, and to render a death sentence in an appropriate case. Only jurors who are willing to consider sentencing someone to death may be selected. After the jury is chosen, the government has the burden of proving the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt and offers evidence to convince the jury that the defendant committed the offense. The defendant can offer evidence to rebut such the prosecution's evidence or to establish innocence, but has no burden of proof and is presumed innocent until proven otherwise. Wuornos' capital trial for murder of Richard Mallory began on January 13th of 1992 here in Volusia County. Wuornos' case was tried in Volusia County, Florida. Tricia Jenkins, Chief Assistant Public Defender of the 5th Judicial Circuit, represented Wuornos at her trial. Wuornos stood trial only once, as she pled no contest or guilty to the other subsequent murder charges. Private attorney Stephen Glazer represented her following the first trial and arranged those pleas no contest or guilty. The district attorney at the time of Aileen Wuornos' trial was State Attorney John Tanner. Judge Oriel Blunt came out of retirement specifically to try Wuornos' case. Prosecutors based their evidence mainly on the videotaped confession Aileen Wuornos gave to detectives during interrogation. The prosecution was able to introduce evidence related to Wuornos' other murder charges based on a Florida law known as the Williams Rule, which allows evidence related to collateral crimes to be admitted if it helps to show motive, intent, knowledge, modus operandi, or lack of mistake. Prosecutors dismissed Wuornos' initial claims that all 7 murders were in self-defense by pointing out that Wuornos' story varied with each subsequent telling. In the other's confession to officers, Wuornos said Mallory picked her up and when she was hitchhiking, and they later went to a secluded wooded area to engage in an act of prostitution. She and Mallory then began arguing. Wuornos said that she felt Mallory was going to roll her, take her money, and rape her. So she grabbed a bag in which she kept a gun, and the two began struggling over the bag. Wuornos prevailed, pointed the gun at Mallory, and said, "You son of a bitch, I knew you were going to rape me." To which Mallory responded, "No, I wasn't. No, I wasn't." At this point, Wuornos shot Mallory at least once while he still was sitting behind the steering wheel. Mallory crawled out of the driver's side and shut the car door. Wuornos said she ran around to the front of the car and shot Mallory again, causing him to fall to the ground. While he was lying there, Wuornos shot him twice more, went through his pockets, concealed the body beneath a piece of rug, drove off in his car. Wuornos also told lawyers and officers that she had given Tyra Moore inconsistent versions about what happened. In one, Wuornos told Moore she had found the dead body hidden under a scrap of rug in the woods, but in another she confessed to the killing. In her initial taped confession, Wuornos never mentioned that Richard Mallory had raped her. During the confession, it appeared Wuornos was not focused on clearing herself so much as clearing her lover, Moore. Moore had cooperated with the police to convince Wuornos that Moore was going to be prosecuted unless Wuornos fully cooperated. Many believe Wuornos appeared confident and not at all upset during her confession. She made easy conversation with her interrogators and repeatedly told her public defenders to be quiet. She said, "I took a life. I'm willing to give up my life because I killed people. I deserve to die." The defense's case argued that Wuornos' statements in the videotaped confession were obtained involuntarily and in violation of her right to due process. Despite the fact she was advised of her Miranda rights and provided with a public defender who advised her not to make any lengthy statements, law enforcement's exploitation of her relationship with Moore and obtaining the confession so impaired her mental state and level of functioning that she did not have a rational understanding of her rights and of the advice of counsel. The trial court rejected the argument and denied that the defense motion suppressed the videotaped confession. And moreover, the videotaped confession had already been leaked to the media, further influencing the public's perception of Wuornos. During later interviews with the police, Wuornos went into detail about her self-defense claim. She explained that she had offered to perform an act of prostitution with Mallory, and he drove her to an isolated area where the two drank, smoked marijuana, and talked for about 5 hours. Wuornos described herself as a drunk royal. Around 5 a.m., Wuornos disrobed to perform the act of prostitution. She asked Mallory to remove his clothes, but she said he wanted only to unzip his pants, and he didn't have enough money to pay her fee. Wuornos went to retrieve her clothes, but Mallory whipped a cord around her neck, threatened to kill her, like the other sluts I've done, and tied her hands to the steering wheel. According to Wuornos' later version, Mallory violently raped her vaginally and anally and took pleasure from her cries of pain. Mallory eventually untied her and told her to lie down, believing he intended to kill her. She began to struggle. Mallory told her, "You're dead, bitch, you dead." At this point, Wuornos found her purse and removed her gun. Mallory grabbed her hand, and the two began to fighting for the gun. Wuornos prevailed and shot Mallory. Mallory kept coming at her despite her warning, so she shot him twice more. Against her attorney's wishes, Wuornos testified at the trial. A defendant has a constitutional right not to testify, and the prosecution could not call her to the stand. However, once the defendant testifies, any refusal to answer questions can be held against her by the court and the jury. During her testimony, she repeated her claim of self-defense. During cross-examination, she became agitated and angry. Her attorneys repeatedly advised her not to answer questions, and she invoked her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination 25 times. She was the only defense witness. Wuornos' defense also raised an issue that soon after her arrest, 3 detectives on the case, as well as Tyra Moore, talked to the media to sell their story. Some people suspected some deals had influenced the witnesses to exaggerate their stories to more lucrative offers. The jury found Wuornos guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder and armed robbery. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, an angry Wuornos shouted, "You sons of bitches, I was raped. I hope you get raped, scumbags of America." This outsport likely was fresh in the jurors' minds as they began the sentencing phase the very next day. After Aileen Wuornos was found guilty of the murder of Richard Mallory, a penalty trial was held before the same jury to determine whether she would face the death penalty or be given life in prison without parole. In most states at this penalty trial, the jury chooses between death and life in prison, but by deciding whether the case involves certain statutorily specified aggravating circumstances, facts that make the crime more serious or the defendant more deserving of death, any mitigating circumstances, facts that extenuate the crime or make the defendant less culpable, and then whether the aggravating circumstances outweigh the mitigating circumstances. The penalty phase of Aileen Wuornos' trial began on January 28th of 1992. The state's expert psychologist, Dr. Bernard, testified that Aileen Wuornos suffered from both borderline personality disorder as well as an antisocial personality disorder. Although he agreed with other experts that Wuornos experienced impaired capacity and mental disturbances at times of the crime, he concluded the impairment was not substantial and that the disturbance was not extreme. He also agreed that with the evidence of non-statutory mitigating evidence, such as Wuornos' mental problems, alcoholism, disturbances, and genetic or environmental deficits. In response to the introduction of evidence of Wuornos' difficult childhood and upbringing, the state called 2 witnesses from her childhood: Louis Grody, Wuornos' biological aunt and stepsister, and Barry Wuornos, her biological uncle and stepbrother. Barry Wuornos testified Wuornos' grandfather laid down rules and was someone who looked up to, although he had never really been her father. He beat Aileen, he's seen several times, was spanked, and when she was 10, the discipline became more tight. Barry testified that Aileen's biological father, who committed suicide while in prison for rape and kidnapping, was abusive and a criminal type. The jury recommended the death sentence by a vote of 12-0, concluding that 5 aggregating circumstances and only 1 mitigating factor were present in Wuornos' case. The 5 aggregating circumstances were: Wuornos had a previous felony conviction involving the use of threat or violence. Murder was committed during the commission of a robbery. Murder was committed in order to avoid arrest. Murder was heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Murder was cold, calculated, and premeditated. The trial jury found 1 mitigating factor: Aileen Wuornos suffered from borderline personality disorder. The jury decided, despite her psychological difficulties, Wuornos knew the difference between right and wrong. The judge found the following non-statutory mitigators: Wuornos suffered from antisocial and borderline personality disorders. She may have been physically abused as a child. Her natural father and grandfather committed suicide. Her grandmother died of it as an alcoholic, and her mother abandoned her as an infant. The judge followed the jury's recommendation of death and sentenced Wuornos to death in the electric chair, 31st of 1992. Ultimately, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection and died in the electric chamber and the execution chamber in Florida State Prison, Rayford, 2022. Let me know down in the comments below if you have ever been by this courthouse, if you knew about Aileen Wuornos' story, if you checked out any of my other videos. I've covered her story about 4 times on my channel. As always, continue for the history and film. I look forward to catching you guys in the next video. This one's a little bit more gloomier, but it's definitely one that needs to be told. Catch you guys in the next video. Have a great day.